Congressman, good to have you with us. While you were celebrating President Trump's funding freeze online, daycare providers, some of them in your district, were shut out of their payment portals. And for 2 days, they were scrambling to try and make emergency plans. Maybe they had to notify parents to get ready or to have other plans for their kids while they go to work or go to college. I understand Congress has every right to conduct oversight of federal spending. But does the president have constitutional authority or the right to just shut the money off?
Well, the president does have the right to make the final appropriation or the final distribution of the funds that we appropriate. Look, that funding freeze in some ways might have been a little broad if it did in fact shut off daycare funds, but it did not shut off direct payments to individuals. It did not shut off Social Security checks, TANF checks. It did not shut off Medicaid or food stamps. But I think a pause, some sort of a pause in government funding and grants was entirely appropriate. The Biden administration was scrambling to get money out the door in the final days of his administration. So the DEI initiatives that President Trump is putting a halt to. He wanted to stop that money from flowing, but there were other ridiculous spending measures that he paused. I mean, money for diversity programs in Burma, $50 million for condoms in Gaza, which were being used to float IEDs into Israeli territory. You can't make this stuff up. So, look, I think the
Maybe
idea
you
of
can.
indiscriminately shoveling money out the door is over, and I am glad Donald Trump and the Doge efforts, I hope, will bring an end to some of this wasteful spending.
You said you can't make this stuff up. I wonder if maybe you can. Have you actually seen the spending records that suggest $50 million were spent on condoms in Gaza? That's a lot of condoms.
Yeah, I haven't personally sent a bit, but this is a good point because I think many times money gets funny money just the numbers get put on paper and the money moves. Yeah, whether it actually goes to buy the thing that it was appropriated for, we don't know, or whether it just goes into a slush fund. So I think we need to be critical about this. And I think business as usual in Washington, D.C. is over under the Trump administration and under the Republican Congress.
I'd like to follow up on that. I presume that when you say something, you want voters to believe you. Someone told you that there was $50 million spent on condoms in Gaza, and you believed it, but you just said you didn't see the record yourself. Why do you believe that's true?
Because it comes from sources that I trust, both congressional sources and administration sources.
Okay, well, luckily we can all see those sources. Federal spending is public record, and we can go through and look at exactly how much the U.S. has spent in Gaza. Specifically, for example, the International Medical Corps. They got more than $68 million from October 7 until now in Gaza to operate 2 large field hospitals for things like surgeries or for malnourished people who couldn't find enough food, emergency care for mothers and their newborn babies. But not one penny of that was spent on contraceptives. No money spent on condoms in Gaza there. Now, there might be some confusion because there is record of a different Gaza in Mozambique, Southeast Africa, where there's a Gaza city down there that did get $83 million through the Pediatric AIDS Foundation to prevent the spread of childhood AIDS. Some of that money went toward condoms. Maybe there's just some confusion in the Doge or in the Trump White House here. I don't know that the information you've been given is accurate.
Well, perhaps there is some confusion, Mark, but if you think that there is no waste, fraud, and abuse in federal government, I've got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you.
I'm not interested in a bridge in Brooklyn. I'm interested in accurate information.
Shoveling out money, for instance, to illegal and divisive DEI programs in which racial discrimination is rampant those days are over. So gotcha questions about whether there's a Gaza in Mozambique. I don't know. I don't have that with me. I'll certainly look it up when this interview is over. But I will say that the rise of to power, which 77 million Americans voted for, against business as usual, against lawlessness at our southern border, against wasteful spending, against the indoctrination of our kids and discrimination in the name of equity. Those days are over, and we have a new day in Washington, D.C., and so I welcome Donald Trump's willingness to shake things up, including looking more carefully at where our tax dollars are going.
I like that word, more carefully. I want to be careful in how I choose words and the accuracy of the information that I share. I'll finish with a question you made on social media. Recently, you talked about this looming discussion that Republicans are about to have about whether or not to cut welfare programs. You said, as an aside, you mentioned here in your post that you don't like the term working class. You called that a Marxist term. I wonder what terms you will allow us to use to describe wealth. Can we say billionaire?
Well, certainly if someone has a net worth of $1 billion, we could say the word billionaire. Look, the idea that we are pitted black against white, man against woman, working class against middle class, bourgeoisie versus proletariat, that is a Marxist derived term. My point there, though, is we're not cutting welfare. This is what we're talking about. Work requirements on our TANF welfare check program and our food stamp programs, those were enacted in a bipartisan fashion. A bill enacted by the Republican Congress, signed by President Clinton in 1996, and it was an unqualified success. 80% of people got off of welfare, and 2 years later, on average, those families' incomes have doubled. So we're adding work requirements, for instance, to Medicaid. Yes, it's going to save money on welfare, but I don't like to characterize it as a cut. It's a common sense approach that, yes, may save money, but more importantly, it's going to get people back into the workforce, something our economy badly needs, and give them the dignity of work that in the very short to intermediate term will allow them to step up the economic ladder. So every time we talk about reforming welfare, Democrats demagogue this and say, you're cutting poor people off. But look, folks who work, and if you want to use the word working class, but people who are at median income or a little bit lower than median income, who are working their tails off, resent the fact that these welfare programs, with these welfare programs, others are not working and doing just as well.
You did say that you didn't want to pit American groups against each other, but look, whatever adjective or noun we use to describe how poor a person is, Medicaid, as you well know, those benefits only flow to people who are under a certain income threshold. So dollars and cents, a person has to be at a certain poverty level to even qualify. So to your work requirement, I understand you want the people that are getting these benefits to show up and punch a clock. But let me present you with a very real-world scenario.
Oh, Mark, what's wrong with going to a job where you have to punch a clock? Are you demeaning the value of work, Mark?
No, not at all. I would never do so. I think that work's a very valuable thing, obviously.
It sounds like you are, though. You demean the idea of going to a job where you have to punch a clock. You don't want people who are capable of working. And right now, to address your question, 130 able-bodied working-age adults can qualify for Medicaid up to 138% of poverty, but that doesn't take into account the value of all the other government services that person may benefit from, like the earned income tax credit, like food stamps, like subsidized childcare, like subsidized housing. So when you add those benefits up, those folks are doing fine, but what we're asking as a society is you need to work for those. And if you do, that is what our social safety network, our social safety net is all about. Giving people a handout when they're in a hard way so they can make a step up. And that's what work requirements are all about. And if they save money also, that is very good, and they do tend to save money.
Okay, so here's my question though. Where does that leave the grandmother whose daughter is going to work or maybe going to college while grandma stays home with the kids? Maybe grandma's on Medicaid. And she, if she tries to qualify to keep her Medicaid by going to work under your plan, what happens to those kids?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I understand your question. So grandma is the child care provider. Look, if grandma is 65, she's probably on
She might be
Medicare,
45.
and she might qualify for Medicaid if she's a so-called dual eligible, if she's quite poor and disabled and 65. But 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 I don't understand. Is your point that everyone should be on
No.
Medicaid, Mark? Because that's what, by the way, Obamacare did. Obamacare Medicaid expansion was supported by groups like chamber groups, because then lower wage workers were then who had private insurance were dumped
Well,
onto Medicaid.
with respect, Congressman, this isn't my proposal. I'm questioning if you have done the work to think about these different scenarios, how your plan would impact people in your district. And that may include, as you know, some grandmothers who could be 45, 50 years old. They don't qualify for Medicare, where they're automatically on health insurance. And your work requirement would kick them off Medicaid, even if they were working, staying at home, taking care of their grandkids.
So a decision to stay out of the workforce is one's own decision. But if you're capable of working, if you're an able-bodied working age adult, you ought to be working.
And what happens to the kids?
Well, the kids, if they're in school, they go to school. If they're preschool age, they could go to preschool. They could get childcare with a neighbor, a child, there are a number of different options. There are tens of millions of working parents in our country, and they're not all on Medicaid, Mark.
Well, that's certainly true. I hope we can continue this conversation in the weeks ahead and look forward to tracking the progress of these proposals. I'm sure we're running low on time here. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.